Hello everyone, and welcome to Contributing Today. My name is Mark Duiker, and I'll be guest hosting this week's meetup. I'm an Azure consultant. I work for Xperit. I work a lot with serverless technology, and I'm also pretty active in the serverless community. But when I'm not doing anything with serverless, then I enjoy some creative hobbies. One of them is to create pixel art. You may have seen VS Code pads or some people's avatars on Twitter. But I also enjoy to occasionally make a retro game with Pico 8. So I'm really excited about this week's topic. Contributing Today is a mostly weekly show covering different open source tech topics every week. Maybe you're a regular or you're joining for this week's topic, which is open gaming and open source game development. Either way, let everybody know that you're watching this meetup by using the Contributing Today hashtag. Please join us in the chat, either in Discord or in the embedded chat to the right of the screen. They both end up at the same place, so our moderators can find it. When you do that, please be mindful of our code of conduct. You can review our terms on Contributing.Today/code-of-conduct. You can also find past recordings of the meetup, for instance, on Python or Go, or writing docs, how to fund and sponsor your open source project on Contributing.Today/past-sessions. All right, that was all the admin stuff. Let's get started. So today we're doing a bit of a panel free flow discussion with folks from the game development world, and we hope you join the conversation in the chat. So let's add them to the conversation. Unfortunately, one of them, M. Laser-Walken, couldn't join us for health reasons, so I'm here to replace her. Our first guest is Mark Mendel, developer advocate for Google Cloud for Games and founder of the open source multiplayer dedicated game server scaling project Agonis. And our other guest, hi there, and our other guest is Ilaria Chislani, Godot engine consultant and contributor and visual effects artist. Welcome.
Hello.
All right. So first things first, let's start at the basics. So what is your definition of the open source gaming development, and what's your role in it?
All right. So I use Godot Engine, which is an open source MIT licensed engine, and for my for game development, but because I also do visual effects, I need to make meshes, models, I need to make textures, and for those I use Krita and Blender. Both of those are as well open source software. And for me, it's not just about the game engine that we use, but also about the other tools around it.
Cool. Yeah, I'll sort of speak to that as well. So my role is primarily backend focused. So I work for Google Cloud. I work on open source tools for backends for multiplayer games. When I generally talk about open source in gaming, I try and talk sort of, I want to take a holistic perspective, going from top to tail, right? So everything from like the stuff like Ilaria, you're talking about, like the client side tools, some of the authoring tools, as well as any other places where we can find good foundational pieces of software we can write that sort of take away sort of a lot of the toil of making games, and where we can come together and build those sort of stuff. So very much similar to what we see in, say, traditional tech, these sort of platforms that build the plumbing of these kind of projects. And I feel like that can sit in anywhere. I mean, I focus on the back end side, but there's different aspects all the way through the entire authoring process of every aspect of games that definitely open source can be applied.
Yeah, so how big is this game space? Because let's say with other industries, you have need for front-end work and back-end work, but I feel the game industry is so much bigger than that. But like you mentioned, Ilaria, all the models you make and the meshes you make and the texturing that needs to be done. So is there a complete tool set out there that can be completely run in open source? Is that a reality?
I think that we are getting there. We're not quite there yet, because there are some parts that are a little bit more tricky. For example, audio. There are some good open source tools out there with audio. And when we tried to build a pipeline full of with only open source tool, there was actually we fell a little short on a substitute for Substance Designer, which is a program, Substance Painter, sorry, which is programs that used to make materials for 3D objects. Finding substitutes for that is difficult at the moment. There are some very, very promising projects out there, such as Armor Paint. There's also Material Maker, which is developed with Godot. And so that was one part that was a little bit more difficult to tackle. In general, I think that we're getting there. I think that in particular, I'm really, really inspired by Blender, how it came to be this tool that was like really niche, hard to use, and now it's huge. And I hope that Godot can follow very quickly, and so all the other open source projects that can help game developers make their games.
Yeah, because Blender has been around for ages, right? I mean, I haven't used it recently, but I know it needs from like maybe 10 years ago or something. I don't know, but so it is a big space, and it is maturing, like you say. But for instance, Mark, I've seen on the Agonis website that the product is used by quite some big names in the industry. So is that common? Is it growing? What's the adoption on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So for people not familiar, Agonis is a project I was a founder on. It's been running for I think it's about 4 years now, actually, 3 or 4 years, something like that. It's for running dedicated game servers, so backends for multiplayer games. It's an orchestration layer. This is on top of Kubernetes, which I'm sure many of your listeners are probably familiar with as a name. It's been an interesting ride, and I'm sure, Ilaria, you've probably seen very similar things in terms of getting adoption for open source tech inside big game companies, or sometimes even small ones, in that it was definitely not the norm. There's definitely big cultural differences in the games industry between like what's wider tech and what's sort of in games, especially if you're talking like 4 years ago. The classic example I like to tell is like you'd go to a conference at a tech thing and you'd be like, all right, let me tell you all about the stuff, and here at the end, here's a GitHub repo with all my code, and I can see everything, and it's awesome. And then you go to a game talk and they're like, I'm going to tell you all about the concepts of everything I did, but not any of the actual technical details, and no, you can't have the code, and none of it's open source, and you can't see it. I'm sorry. And I feel like that's shifting. And that kind of stuff. I also probably have a slightly skewed view in that I work in backend engineering, which is so predominantly based on open source. So you don't really have a choice, like everything from Linux to databases to platforms to hosting services, even down to like containerization and all that kind of stuff. So there's that, but it feels like it's shifting. But and Larry, I'll probably punt this over to you. You probably see a different thing because you probably face more client side obstacles. Then we have different obstacles and different incentives from client side to say backend and that kind of stuff. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that adoption and game development of open source software is still a little of a rocky road, because I feel like there's a lot of stigma around it, because open source projects tend to have this reputation of being hard to use, kind of clunky. And I really, really hope that can change. There's still a lot of different ways that people interact with open source software and closed source software. Like in a way, sometimes closed source software can feel more professional, right? Well, open source, because it's a little bit, like Godot in particular, is still a little bit an underdog. So it's a little harder to justify bugs and say, hey, this is just the way it is, we can fix it. But it's I think it's changing. I think it will change.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. There's a phrase I like to use, which is what like proprietary software you pay with money, open source you pay with your time. Right? Nothing is ultimately free. So if you're buying into an open source platform, it's very much that, okay, I'm using this open source tool, but who do I scream at when things go wrong? And you're like, sorry, that's not how it works.
Yeah, but do you actually see then? Sorry, but yeah. I was wondering, because people didn't use it for free, but do you see kind of, is there a sponsorship model for either Godot or Agonis, or do you see contributions from people who actually work in the game industry, contributing their time back to your projects?
Okay. Ahead, so yes, I do work for a consulting company that offers services around Godot. I will plug the link later.
Please do.
Sorry, I lost it.
Well, are people
Oh, yes,
giving their time
absolutely,
back
yes.
for sponsorships and
Yeah, so in the before working for Braincells, I was working for a medical simulation company, and actually I did get a chance to contribute back to Godot a bunch of bug fix mostly for that company, and that's the same with our company right now for Braincells. We do contribute back to Godot however as much as we can. There's of course to keep in mind that the times of open source are not the times of a company. So if you want a feature tomorrow and then you submit your pull request, it's not going to be reviewed tomorrow. It's not going to be merged tomorrow. So there's a workflow that you have to learn, because when you work with just proprietary technology, you can go as fast as possible. If you really want to stay at the top of the engine, to keep having the new features of the engine, that you really need to get into the mindset of maintaining a fork for a while, then of course reconciliate all the different things, and then your implementation might be different. So it does happen that people contribute back, companies contribute back. Also, Godot accepts donations, of course. So any kind of donations we also accept donations for specific work.
Right, yeah. Okay.
But however, that doesn't mean that if we get the donation for something, we still have to follow the engine's philosophy. So we will not take something that does not match with the engine philosophy. Even if somebody offers us money, we would just of course want to find a way to work together, but we are bound ethically with the Software Freedom Conservancy to follow what's best for the engine, what we think is best for the engine. So of course, financial partnerships are possible, but there is no option for buying a feature into the engine. That does not happen.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, I mean, I work for Google, so I work for a large corporation, and part of our open source endeavors is part of our overall strategy for supporting people who build big gaming games, big multiplayer games, or big backends for games. And so that's directly tied into that. We very much sort of the commercial open source kind of strategy, where we have some managed stuff on top as well. But essentially, we build a platform that can run anywhere Kubernetes can run. And if you're not familiar with that, that's kind of the de facto standard for a lot of backend and distributed systems. And we stick to that philosophy in open source 100%. There's no question there. So in terms of sponsorship, that's not really a thing because we're a big corporate entity. But we definitely get a lot of contribution from a variety of game studios. Going from the outset, we built it with Ubisoft in collaboration. That was where it was founded. And then since then, we've had contributions from all over the place. You can go through the Git logs. And if you go to the Agonis.dev website, you can see that, the used by companies include, Ubisoft we talked about, Embark Studios, who does awesome open source work. I'm going to forget stuff, so I should actually look at the page so that I don't mess that up and say something either I shouldn't or forget somebody that I should. That was smooth. Did you like that? Next big games afterwards, Alta games like Jaeger. It's a great list. And we've had everything from people who come and stay for months to years in contributing to pretty normal open source stuff, right? People come in, they're like, I want this thing, and then they go head out, and that's totally fine. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Do you have some good first issues in both of your projects that's suitable for newbies?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
I'm not taking anything for granted. But it's good, right? So call to action, everyone. Please go to indeed these repositories. Cool.
No, absolutely. We have, Slack channels, Google groups. Though most of the stuff I think happens in Slack channels. Conversation's pretty active on GitHub. Everything's pretty much discussed. It's right now. Actually, that's an interesting question. So we're a sort of loose, what do I call it? Anarchistic duocracy. One could argue that I'm probably still a benevolent dictator in some ways, but general consensus, as long as we reach general consensus, that's how we do it. Larry, do you have more of a strict governance model or anything like that on your project?
So we had a benevolent dictator kind of model for quite some time. Now we're trying to as the project grows, of course, having one person having all the decision power, it becomes harder and harder and harder, because then we accumulate backlogs of pull requests to check, issues to check, proposals to check. So we are trying to shift more in a direction where we make sure that the vision of the engine is still maintained, because Godot is kind of unique in many ways, and we want that to stay. We want the approach of Godot to stay. We want to keep the engine size and in general the features to a minimum, and whatever is not strictly necessary to be part of the core of the engine is going to be a plugin. So Godot follows a lot of this philosophy of a small core with a lot of ecosystem around it, rather than accepting everything. So yes, we do have still a relatively small core. We have 10 hired developers at the moment that are funded by donations, and we are trying to of course maintain these people, grow the size of the team, and also hire more of those contributors that already do a lot of good work with the engine. So we still are kind of in a benevolent dictator phase, but we are shifting away from it because it's just not sustainable.
Sometimes single people don't scale. I know this one
exactly.
well. Yeah, we're doing similar things.
Could you please explain the term benevolent dictator? Because I know it, but maybe some viewers don't.
Sure. Essentially, it means usually there's one person in charge, but they have the well-being of everyone in mind. It's quite often how a lot of projects start. It's fine until you start hitting the sort of pain points that you're referring to, Ilaria. And we're starting to do some things where a while ago we started an approver system, so approvals could be spread out over multiple people. And we've just sort of had an organic way of doing that. Do you agree with that? Is that okay, Ilaria? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. We are trying to build different teams that take care of different parts of the engine, so that a lot of things that generally go to the core team can be delegated to those teams, so that we can have a layered step. So first of all, we're going to have people in the team review the proposal, bring them to the team leader, then the team leader brings them higher up. And that should be also kind of good for onboarding people, so that you don't necessarily have to go directly to the project lead, like, I want to do this. It's kind of, it can be scary for people to go to the right. project lead and say, hey, what do you think about this? But we also try to ease in new contribution also with this process. So we recently moved away from IRC to our own chat platform, which is based in Rocket Chat. Because we want people to be able to come together, talk about things that they want to implement, talk about details. So we're trying to go on a more open process of development.
Yeah, I like that approach. Sounds very good. Yeah. Are there specific areas you want contributions for now?
Right now is a little bit of a weird moment because we are between two major versions. So there's a lot of work on the 4.0 version that's in our main branch, and then there's the work for the 3.4 version now, which is the kind of a stable branch, and it is. I can tell it's a little bit annoying right now to contribute, because if you want to contribute a feature, you have to contribute it for 3.0 and 4.0, and certain things are 3.x and 4.0, and certain things are fine because certain parts of the engine did not change so much, but some other parts of the engine did change, and it could be daunting to go and say, like, okay, I finally made my pull request, I put my feature there. Okay, now I gotta
do it for the other branch. Oh, yeah, that is challenging.
But that is not the case for every contribution. Like, for example, bug fixes are very, very welcome on the 3.x release. Feature are a little bit of a trickier topic, because eventually the 3.x is going to be maintained as a stable branch, but we don't want to keep growing. Every feature you add 10 bugs. So at a certain point, the focus of development will shift to 4.0. So right now, it's a great moment to contribute bug fixes, especially for the 3.0 branch. And I think it's still interesting to take a look at the current pull requests that gets opened to get an idea on how we do things, or how we chat with one another, how we talk about things, how the code looks like. So it isn't probably the most the most ideal moment to contribute huge features and stuff like that, but definitely contribution is always welcome. Also, contribution is not just code, so also documentation, triaging issues, testing, all those sort of things.
Cool. So you sound like you have pretty good standards and procedures and stuff like that. So I assume everything is up to date in your readmes and your contributing docs and stuff like that. It sounds like you have everything in order, right? Or is it an
probably
incorrect assumption?
Well, let's put it this way: if you find something wrong, pull requests are accepted.
Hey, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we have pretty comprehensive guides on like all our build tooling and how to get started and that kind of stuff. But yeah, sometimes things go out of whack. So yeah, if you find something, let us know or submit a pull request for sure.
That's how it works. Yeah, exactly. All right.
But I will say one thing as a general rule, like if you are going to contribute to an open source project, please read the Contributing.Md file.
Yes, exactly.
This happens so often that people are like, I'll just jump in. And it'll save everyone so much time, even if it's just simple stuff like this is the linter you need to run and like this kind of stuff to stop that kind of stuff. So yes, please as a general rule, read your contributing guides.
Good tip. Yes. We're not talking about your projects now, but more like you personally. So how did you get started in open source game development? Hilaria?
Be okay. It's strange because I started using Blender when I was at second year of university instead of following statistics classes. And then that was my first touch with open source software. But I had a really mindset shift, and the world opened for me when we made a game for the Global Game Jam in Unity. And then a friend came one day in the lab. It's like, oh, this friend recommended this engine, Godot engine. And like many things in my life, I had a good feeling about it. So I just jumped straight on. And I've been getting deeper and deeper into the even the basic concept of open source, because it was something I knew existed, but yeah, okay, this is like all those weirdos that do that stuff. Yeah, fine. That was how I was thinking about things back then, but it's definitely different now.
Yeah, I came from wider tech before coming into doing game stuff, and so I spent a lot of time in my career building out tooling for primarily web stuff. So if anyone remembers Cold Fusion, which is an old Adobe tech that's how old I am and I have gray hair. I built a lot of open source tools specifically for development in that space. And so I had a long history of building that kind of stuff. So I've always really enjoyed open source stuff. I really enjoyed building developer tooling platforms for people to build on top of. That's something that I've always felt passionate about and really enjoyed, both philosophically and just socially. And then when I started working in the games industry, so basically when I joined Google, and in the way of all things, right, when you have opinions about stuff, people hand you things to do. I was like, I want to do the things in the GDC and the stuff, please. And they're like, you own this now. I was like, okay. But doing that, and something that's worked really well for me in my career, is being able to take concepts and themes from other areas that I've had it in my technological life and pulling that into new communities. I was able to come into the gaming space and be like, there doesn't seem to be like a lot of open source things that solve the particular problems that I work in, which is primarily backend stuff. And there doesn't seem to be like a huge push for open source in some areas as well. And I was like, that seems to be a thing that we could do. And again, in my role, I'm developer advocate. I talk to a lot of game customers. I talk to a lot of people building particularly game server workloads. And I get personally very frustrated when I see a lot of people reinventing the same thing over and over again. And that upsets me, and it makes my hands hit keyboard. And I go, fine, we're going to build a thing, and we're going to make this thing happen. I'm very fortunate to work with some great people at Google that allowed me to do that kind of work, and we're very supportive of that, and having some great peers and mentors to help guide that work as well. And so, yeah, started building stuff, and things have gone from there. We've released a few open source things now, Google Cloud for Gaming, which has been super, super nice.
Awesome. Yeah. Very nice. I see some questions popping up here in the chat. Let's start with this one. Where does the name Godot come from?
It comes from the opera We're Waiting for Godot, because you're always waiting for the next release.
That is nice. Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Okay. And Ogonis?
It was... there's a habit with things that are built on Kubernetes that things get Greek names, because Kubernetes is Greek for
of course,
something. And it was well, first of all, it got passed through PR and legal. Let's be clear on that. But it was Agonis is I believe the precursor to sort of Olympic Games. It was a communal gathering where there was a competition. And I believe, according to some Greek people I know, that it should be with this, like it's Agonis with a soft G, with a hard G. Apparently, it just means elbows. But either way, it's fine. I don't care. I commonly get asked, like, how does it get pronounced? And I'm like, as long as it has a G and an N in it, I don't care. It's fine.
Okay, that's nice. All right. I see another question for you, Ilaria. So if someone is already using one of the proprietary game engines, how easy is it to move to the Godot engine?
Okay. That's a funny one. I have developed with Unity for 4 years, and then I used Unreal for a year, and then I moved to Godot, never turned back. How easy it is, I think it depends on how open you are to reconsider the way that you think and you code things. Very often we see people trying to apply Unity concepts to Godot. They don't always work super well. Right. It is something that's definitely possible. Godot also has C# support for people that are more comfortable with C#. The engine itself uses GDScript, which is its own scripting language similar to Python. And it is something that if you already have a programming experience, it shouldn't take longer than a day to be productive with it. So even a day is a little bit of a stretch, honestly. Right. So it depends. It has it does need people to have a little bit of patience to not just do what I did with Blender, where it was just pushing buttons and try to do things without understanding anything about the software worked. But the concept for me, I found everything very, very intuitive. It felt like the right way of structuring my game, in particular because Godot does not make huge distinctions between objects in a scene and scenes. In Godot, everything is a scene, so you decide what's a scene, you decide what's a level, and like I really, really like this approach because I have been touching Unreal recently for a VFX course that I'm following, and Unreal is much more strict on how you have to do things. So I find myself always often fighting with the way that I want to do things and the way the engine wants me to do things, which is something that I don't have with Godot. So I personally prefer the approach of Godot, although it is worth noting that it's easier to shoot yourself in the foot when you do that.
Right. Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. And do you also have this process maybe documented? So if people come from another engine, do you have like a guide? Okay, this is the name from Unreal, and this is the names we use in Godot. Yeah, okay, that's super useful.
We do have pages about how do concept translate from one engine to the other.
Yeah. Nice.
For Unity, I'm not sure about Unreal.
Yeah. Okay. So how common is it to switch your complete backend, Mark, for the scaling of your servers for games? Does it happen often, or?
Probably. That's a good question. Usually, I feel like so, and Larry, I'm sure you've seen very similar things. The game development lifecycle looks very different from what some people might see in wider tech. You know, it's a anywhere even around 3-year like journey. You know, 1 year is short, like really short, especially if you're building like a big game. So quite often you'll see game studios pick their tech at like the beginning of when they're making their game, and that's the tech they use all the way through. That's usually the life cycle I see. So they're gonna do that all the way through, and then they're gonna release, and that's the tech they're gonna change on, because changing that all the way through is like what's gonna break? I don't know. It's a risk, right? Like, why would I do that?
Right.
Where I see more, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of maintenance type scenarios. Or long-term, like where do we clear out our technical debt and that kind of stuff, is where we see the advent of like games as a service. So games that have really long lives, you've got seasons, you've got multiple arcs, you've got multiple DLCs, that kind of stuff. And when you have those kind of long-lived games, then it absolutely makes sense for companies to go back around and say, okay, how can we improve this? How can we optimize this? How can we make this better? You know, what can we do to improve things? In that way, sometimes we'll see people come and be like, okay, maybe we should be looking at, say, these open source platforms or other tooling that's available in that set to see if there's things we can optimize on. But like any legacy enterprise system that we see in general tech as well, right? That's always a slow process, that there's a lot of investment there. So again, it's that trade-off. You know, if I'm building from scratch, greenfield, cool, I'm going to go with this platform. If it doesn't last for very long and like that's a thing, then fine. We'll just leave that the way it was. But doing kind of brownfield stuff, that's always going to take some time. But it is an interesting one. One of the reasons I believe in open source is that it is that opportunity to build something. I don't know if the right way is the right way, but like without necessarily cutting corners in the way that you might necessarily on a production system, because you have deadlines and you have different types of incentives at play. That means that while it may necessarily maybe takes longer or have different things like that, when those teams kind of come back around, the conversations I often have is like, oh, I wish we had this when we started, you know, like that, or I wish this thing existed when we started, because of those reasons. Sometimes you're able to sort of build a better mousetrap to a degree.
That makes sense.
But sometimes as being open source, sometimes that's the thing you just have to do to get into a studio, because you're not proprietary and there are certain challenges that you face because of that. You just have to be better in some ways. I don't know if you've seen similar things there, Ilaria.
Yeah, so personally, in my journey of development, I have found, like, since I started using open source software, it's huge. It's a huge difference. And right now, closed source software to me feels like more liability than anything else, because what do you do if you have a problem? There's of course the open proprietary software comes with customer support. Usually, if you pay for it, what if you don't pay for it? What if you don't pay enough for it? What if they're just busy and they can't fix your problem? What if it's stopping your project? So right now, for me personally, it's not something that I want to go for unless I really, really need to.
Right. Yeah.
But it is hard for people to switch software when they've invested a lot in existing software. And there is also, I feel like, a problem with trust, because open source projects, unless they are backed by a big company, it's kind of a weird situation, because some people will look at open source backed by a big company and be like, oh no, the company is going to control the project and don't want anything to do with it because it's not going to work. But on the other hand, open source also looks sometimes to people can look like, because it's not backed by a big company, it's like, oh, this is someone's big project. I don't want my commercial product to depend on it. This is a liability. This is a problem, which is kind of feels like, you know, any way you do open source, it's never going to be the right one sometimes.
Oof. Yeah. Convincing people is probably the hardest job in that. Yeah.
I know, absolutely, Ilaria. I think open source is similar in the proprietary sense or the commercial sense, in that, like, you need to vet your software. I think the way you go about vetting them is, you know, it's just different, right? Like, if in a commercial sense, you'd be looking at your contracts, who is the company, what size are they going to be around for a while, et cetera, et cetera. On the open source side, it's like, is it stable? Does it do the things I want to do? Can I load test it, make sure it works, or whatever the client side versions of that are, right? But then also, like, who are the contributors? How often is it contributed to? How often do they respond to issues and pull requests? How active is the community? What does that look like? What does the ecosystem look like? Very similar things on both sides, but yeah, like I said before, you do have to you pay with your time. And so you have to be able to do that. And it may even come down to looking at the source code and going like, okay, yeah, if there's an issue, do we have the skills in-house so that we can fix those issues? Or do we think we could ramp up on those skills in that time frame to do that as well? And if the answer is yes, and that's sort of like a safe bet. If the answer is no, then like that's something you need to sort of put in your whole risk assessment as well. I have commercial perspectives as well as philosophically open source like ones. Which is fine. Like I want everything to be free and open source. Don't get me wrong, but also like, someone's got to make money too.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering: is there like a level up, like a consortium who has the best interest for open source game tools and stuff like that? Is there? Because it feels like that there could be room for something like that that helps everyone to promote the projects and products you make.
Is there an open source consortium for like all like outside writer tech? Like there are. I mean, we have like the Linux Foundation, CNCF, and stuff like that. But there's also, but there's also organizations that sit outside of that and so that work in conjunction. Like open source is messy. It's people. It's like a lot of people.
But it's like the industry is so different. So convincing a bank to use something is completely different than convincing a game studio to use something. So that's why a different kind of a language would probably be useful in any industry. But yeah. All right. Talking about ethics and open source. But we briefly talked about before. We're not lawyers here, so technically, the game engines and also need server scaling software can also be used for any purposes, and maybe for military purposes. So, do you have any licenses around that? Do you have implemented some ethical licenses to prevent these things, or would you consider that maybe?
So it's an interesting topic to talk about ethical licenses. Would I like people using the engine for military purposes? Definitely not. The last thing that I expect from contributing to a game engine is like it being used to like harm other human beings. This is my perspective on this, of course. Godot is currently licensed under the MIT license. And I do think that there's a lot of interesting talk to be had about those ethical licenses. Right now, we don't have plans to change the license of the engine. And I don't expect that to happen anytime soon.
That's also a scary process, changing license and how people respond to it. So,
Oh yeah, there's been any drama around open source licenses recently at all. Like it's not like that's been a thing.
I feel like open source is a very, very big umbrella because you get people from very different beliefs all around, and I think that ethical licenses instead tend to put more. They tend to put a fence somewhere and say, okay, this is good, that is bad, and I think that it is easy to think that because we're all contributing to open source, we're all giving back to the community, we all have the similar values, but that's not really the case. I think there's just people that like the idea of having something free, and if they have time, they're going to give back. There's people that are more interested in the absolute freedom of doing anything. So as soon as you add restrictions, you're going to have a lot of people being upset about it. And then there's also other people that are more on the concerned with this ethical debate, what is good, what is not good. So those people were probably more open with having something that says, no, you for example, Hippocratic license, no, you cannot use this to hurt other people. But some other people will value freedom above this. Mm-hmm. So it's just it is hard to come together because it's such people that use open source is such a diverse group with different ideals, and it is hard for the whole world of open source to shift in any direction.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Let's see, opinions of my own and do not represent my employer in any way because I like my job. I 100% agree with you. Open source is fascinating just in general. I mean, it is this juxtaposition of squishy people commercial interests, philosophical differences, and technical acumen, right? Like weird stuff happens. So yeah, we're gonna, it's, you know what, it's just gonna constantly change. That'd be my opinion. Licensing is always gonna constantly change as everything shifts, and that's just, yay, technology.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, any advice I would give it, if you start something completely new, then definitely consider it indeed. Because if you have something out there in the open already and a big user base, then change might be difficult. Yes, but definitely if you start something new, then it would be the ideal, I think, candidate to definitely consider an ethical source.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think it's one to watch. I also just think back to, when it wasn't the norm for open source projects to have code of conducts.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And now we have, very common sets of code of conducts. There's the covenant code of conduct is very popular. We use that one, for example. And now it's at least for what I see, especially in big projects, it seems very rare to not have a code of conduct. So yeah,
the area we're maturing in.
The philosophies and the cultural norms that exist within open source, across open source, and then within individual vertical slices of that ecosystem is going to constantly change, and that's a good thing.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about recent events and pandemic and everybody staying at home, working at home, but also gaming at home. So I can imagine, Mark, the whole server scaling must have gone through the roof over the last year, because probably have people been playing nonstop the last year. No?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at industry trends, gaming has definitely gone up during COVID. That's a pretty ratified analytic, and it seems like someone correct me if I'm wrong, because these are remembering numbers off the top of my head. It seems to have gone up pretty much across the board, at least from anecdote data that I've seen. Depending on what sort of gaming experience you're looking for, could vary from, hey, I want to just holistically just grow turnips and feel good about my little space in the world, to I want to run around and shoot some people, because and everything in between, right? Definitely goes. But yeah, I mean, multiplayer is on the rise, but I think gaming across the spectrum is on the rise as people look for different sorts of escapes, different sorts of content, as different as all the fun stuff that has been in the last couple of years.
So did it give you any new insights because of the higher usage or something? Or
honestly, I don't think it did. We work with a lot of people who make pretty big games, so that was
So it's already, the scale's already big. So yeah,
scale's already big. I don't know if you've noticed that Google itself is also kind of large. I don't know. We tend to work at some big numbers anyway. So that's it. But I think we have a pretty common ebb and flow through open source as well. So I don't know whether it's. I actually would be interested to go back and have a look and see if there's been more people who are now contributing more, because maybe they're at home more, or they have more free time. I don't know.
Exactly. I'm also curious about it. Yeah. Ilaria, have you seen a change in maybe the number of downloads of the Godot engine, or need more issues being worked on over the last year? Or
there's what you mentioned about the checking if there's been a spike after the start of the pandemic. This is something I haven't done, but I can try and fetch data later, and then
exactly, post it in Discord. Exactly. I'm curious. Maybe people pick up lots of new hobbies and start creating games, right?
And for us, tracking the amount of people that use the engine is not super easy, because we don't have any kind of tracking. So everything that we do is people download on Steam and people download from our website. And we can also estimate a little bit from the amount of forks that are there on GitHub. But it's kind of hard to give precise numbers and graphs. But Godot has seen a steady growth, and it keeps growing.
Pretty cool.
I'm trying to I can find on GitHub Insights while we're talking, because that's always the best way of doing it.
Excellent. Yeah. So one of the things I would like to talk about is does artificial intelligence plays a more important role in our everyday lives, but I think also in game development. So does is there an artificial intelligence part already in for instance, Godot already, or do you foresee potential features using artificial intelligence?
So right now, it is not a focus to use artificial intelligence. We do have the possibility to plug Python in the engine. I was actually some 3 years ago, I was trying to make a small self-driving car with AI, like using TensorFlow for university project. Didn't really go anywhere, but there is indeed a lot of interest towards, like in the Game Dev world, I have the impression that there is a lot of interest into automatic content creation, which goes a little bit beyond procedural generation. Although I personally am not incredibly excited because, not because I don't find it interesting, but just it looks like an extension of what's already there, just a little bit more complex to control, a little bit more variegated, more creative. So I am probably not the person to ask about AI, machine learning, and this kind of things, because it's not really my field.
Sure. No worries.
I just figure it's straight magic and leave it at that.
Yeah, but it's nice to know that you can, for instance, use Python in the game engine and hook it up to basically anything you want. That's pretty open. I like it. Yeah. All right. I see a question here. Are we seeing an uptake in serious gaming, so where gamification is applied in a more business context? Do you have use cases of that? Do you know of that?
I might be the wrong person to ask. I think it's a question of what like the definition of serious gaming and like where gamification kind of applies itself and that kind of stuff. I take what I say with a huge grain of salt, but I feel like maybe not serious gaming, but like the integration of gaming elements into, say, like an e-commerce or or some sort of consumer facing platform. I see that more in an APAC region than I probably see it in, say, like a Western region, where it seems to be more of a cultural norm. Please take that with a massive grain of salt. I could be totally off base, but that's just, again, anecdata, where it seems like that sort of seems to be more normal. And like, I don't know, like if I'm buying sneakers online, I don't have a game that I play as a thing as a Western audience. It's not something I regularly see. I don't know. Ilaria, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not much, really. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my stuff is like making, people race against each other in real time over the internet. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe the companies that you do use it and maybe just don't want to talk about it. That's of course also possible. Yeah.
Gamification is like a whole other topic too. I mean, that's where you start getting into, actually, I'll step back from that a little bit. When we talk about gamification, we sort of start talking about sort of the whole, what commonly refers to as like the live ops experience, where we start talking about backend data systems, and how you, especially in the freemium game space, where you like, how do I maintain retention? How do I pull people back in or keep people playing, that kind of stuff? How do I build content that makes sense for the new players coming in or the old players that I want to keep sticking around, that kind of stuff? I would say that a lot of that, you can apply that in other places. Live ops is definitely not something that I am strong in, please. So understand that as well. I also don't know. There are a lot of commercial platforms out there in the gaming space for doing live opsy stuff, especially data and analytics for games. I don't know a huge amount of open source work in that space. So if anyone knows of anything, send it my way. I'd be curious.
All right. So getting back on the metrics telemetry. So Ilaria, you mentioned that you don't do any metrics in Godot. Would you consider that? Yeah, so not by default, or maybe like an opt-in model or something, so people could turn it on, and so you could learn more about how Godot is used.
Yeah. So having a little more data about the engine user would probably be useful for us. Even just like, automatic crash reports that allow you to just go and on and post stack traces and things like this. The problem is that many of us really care about privacy, and already we have an integrated asset library, which is not a store because everything in the asset library is free and open source as well. And some people in the beginning, I recall that they complained like, "Oh, why is Godot connecting to the internet when I open it?" Right. So it is a topic that many of us care about. So we don't really want to impose anything. Plugins, of course, can come. Godot has a pretty solid plugin system, so you can just download something from the asset loop, tick a box in your project settings, and then you have a new editor window with buttons and whatever you need to report bugs, or just enable something that runs in the engine and collects data.
Yeah, I have analytics and tracking for open source is straight nightmare. Because I mean, again, it's not like we've had any drama around that recently. If anyone reads open source news recently, it's again privacy considerations, but also, it's just a mess. How do you know how people are going to be handling that data, or what are they doing with it, and it just becomes a problem. So people don't do it. Usually if we want to track anything, it's like, how many people do we have in our chat group? Who comes back to us with pull requests? That kind of stuff. Or we'll send out informal surveys or things like in that aspect, and like on the mailing list and things like that. You're never going to hit everybody, but I think that's the best kind of scenario you can kind of hit.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks. So talk about releases. So how streamlined is your release process? So Godot, we want of course all these often releases. So how frequently are them, and how fluent are them?
I will let Mark go first on this one.
Okay, Mark, you can go ahead.
That's fantastic. So we have a 6-week release cycle. So we do a 5-week sprint, and then we do a 1-week RC, and then do a stable release. We decided on that kind of early as like a good time-based release. We actually really like doing time-based releases. So I'll talk about that a bit more. I think that's interesting. So basically, we originally actually started on like a feature-based release. So like when X gets done, we're gonna cut a release. We found that resulted in us sort of waiting 3 to 6 months before pushing out something new, and that's just not a great experience for people who are using the platform. We're like, all right, let's get stuff into people's hands as quickly as possible. So yeah, we do a release every 6 weeks. Whatever's ready goes. Like, that's just the deal. We have a system internally for feature flags and stuff if stuff's not ready, so we can turn things off if need be. And I think that's actually worked quite well. So if people have bug fixes, that kind of stuff, we don't backport stuff for that very reason as well. Because if you need it, it's the next version. It's only gonna be 6 weeks away at the absolute worst. And that's worked out pretty well. People like having it, being able to know that there's always going to be something rolling forward. We do have possibly an interesting problem in that we built on top of another technology, which is Kubernetes, which has its own rolling version release over time as well that we need to keep up to date with. Right. We have to release on a regular cadence to support that. But yeah, we have a checklist. It's not the most streamlined thing in the world. Up until recently, I was doing all the releases, and we've expanded that responsibility out, so I don't do them now anymore. That's nice. Yeah. So hopefully those people will also streamline it further. Yeah, it's probably a couple of hours to get a release out the door, which is not the worst, but it's not the best. Yeah. But fair enough. The checklist makes things easier.
Okay. And does it involve a lot of YAML?
That's a running Kubernetes joke. The release itself, do you touch YAML for the release? I don't think so. But anything Kubernetes has to have some YAML. If you're gonna work with Kubernetes, then you're gonna write some YAML. It's gonna happen. Although you don't have to, because there's other ways. You could write JSON if you really want to.
Fair enough.
Yeah, for us, the release process is definitely not that clear cut. We are moving towards a more normal release cycle. I would say common rather than normal. So have major releases, minor releases, hotfix releases, and pretty much our project manager is the person that takes care of understanding what should go like in a hotfix for 3.x, 3.3.1, and or should it's something that needs to go in 3.4.0, or if it's something that cannot be like ported, like it shouldn't be on the older releases, just put it on the 4.0 branch. So he's mostly the person involved in the release process, figuring out when is the right moment, but also he informs his choices on the main maintainers of certain areas. Like we do go through beta and RCs before rolling out the new version of release candidates. So we do still have problems that then arise after release, of course. But what he tries to do is to try and you get the active contributors to fix whatever blocking bug is there. Of course, we cannot just demand people to do that because this is all voluntary work. So you cannot just say, "Yo, why don't you fix my thing in the next 2 days?" I guess sorry. So with the nature of the project also comes a little bit more flexible schedule. So we do release what we like to say, when it's good to release when it's ready. So it is a little bit, it might be a little bit off-putting for people that, they want a cadence on when things happen, so they know exactly when to expect what. But I feel like it works well for us to try and really build something that stays stable, where everything is cohesive, without game-breaking bugs. So our release process is a little bit more flexible around what the engine needs and what the people that use the engine need.
Okay, thanks. So getting it back to the community and then contributing today. So if people want to contribute to open source gaming, and maybe in not specifically your projects, of course they are highly encouraged to do so. But in general, are there any like broader informational websites or newsletters about open source gaming where people can subscribe to or get more information about? Is there like in GitHub, is there an awesome open source gaming list where we can see all of the projects out of the open? Because we need that link there. Then.
There's so many. Just an awesome open source from sorry for the typing. There is a whole awesomeopensource.com. Like there's a whole gaming section that you can go through. I mean that just lists a bunch of GitHub sections as well. One I'll probably shout out to because I've been doing a bunch of Rust work recently, and I'm very excited about the gaming stuff that's happening in the Rust ecosystem. There's Are We Game Yet? Is it Are We Game Yet? Are We Game Yet? Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's it. Did I get that right? I did get that right off the top of my head. There's Are We Game Yet in the Rust ecosystem. There's also a gaming Rust newsletter that goes out on the regular, as well as a Discord channel that is attached to that. There's some. I really like the language, but I also think there's some really interesting and innovative stuff coming out of that. So that's one I would definitely go to. It's not been hugely active, but there is an IGDA SIG for open source stuff. There's a Slack channel for that somewhere. That's a link somewhere. But if you're an IGDA member or you're just kind of interested, that's also a thing. Oh, here you go. Yeah, I found it.
I feel like the Rust ecosystem is like really vibrant and active right now. I do lurk in Bevy Engine's Discord server.
Yep. So for people who aren't familiar, Bevy's an open source Rust engine that came out recently, in the last 6 months, I want to say. that right?
Yeah, it's pretty
very
recent.
new. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Which has been
Oh,
super
cool.
interesting to see. That's sort of and there's like, I can probably think of, including Bevy, there's at least 3 other open source Rust engines that have been sort of coming through recently. I mean, there's Amethyst, there's there's at least another one that I just totally blanked on. And I think that's super interesting.
Piston?
You know what? I don't think I know that one. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, if you have you can put them in the
newsletter,
Discord server later. So that's very welcome. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I have been checking out a lot of the Rust ecosystem some time ago because I saw Rust. It's like, whoa, this is interesting. But time, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, they also find very nice creative coding platforms now, also written in Rust and it. Yeah, exactly. It's difficult to find time. Too many hobbies.
Yeah, and I think also it comes down to like, what area of gaming are you looking at? It probably will dictate which communities you take part of. Because there are some, like, even down to what was I looking at? Is it Twine or Twiney? Which is like an open source tool for narratives. Like, I don't do any writing. I have no idea, right? So there's that kind of stuff. Are you talking about open source tools for like asset generation? It's been, well, who was I talking to the other day? Credit where credit was due. There was someone who was a podcast I was listening to. We were talking about sort of, technical artists who share a lot of their stuff on Twitter and the stuff that they're doing, which I know probably doesn't come into like Apache licensed open source, but like that whole ecosystem of people have come out and are sharing so much knowledge and so much tech on what they do. So find that, gaming isn't just, I don't want to say this is like not disparaging to Godot by any means, but gaming is not just client-side development. There are so many actual aspects to it and around that. Everything from level design, writing, UX work, asset creation, as well as client-side stuff, back-end stuff, analytics. There are so many different avenues there and different angles you can come at it. So there's huge opportunities for open source and a lot of work that's been happening too.
Definitely. Cool. All right. Well, there's of course the mandatory question for you too, Van. Okay, are you playing games, and if yes, what kind of games are you playing?
All right. So I have been playing Hades. I've heard so many good things about Hades. Like, okay, I'm gonna try it. Even if this kind of games is not my kind of game, I'm having a really, really good time. Let's see if I rage quit before finishing it. And other 2 games that I play a lot. One is Sea of Thieves. I think Sea of Thieves is an incredible game design wise. It's super, super fun. I only play with friends, so I don't know how it is to play alone and with random people. But Sea of Thieves is really a great game. And the way they did game design is really, really special. They have been very bold with their decisions. They work really well. 10 out of 10. I love that game. And another game that I have a lot of fun with is Barotrauma. It's a game about about being on a moon of Jupiter, I think, and you are in this submarine and you have to go from different outposts like underwater, and everything always goes wrong. And it's super hard. It's super fun as well. It's really
Sounds
nice
hilarious.
game.
Yeah. Okay.
I am always constantly amused that on the technical side I work on multiplayer stuff and I do not play multiplayer games. I play a lot of first person like action narrative stuff. So like I put like 120 hours into Assassin's Creed Valhalla recently. But now I've finished that to the degree that I was happy with where I finished that. I probably could have lived in that for the rest of my life. But yeah, no, finally got around to playing the PC port of Horizon Zero Dawn, which is just gorgeous, and the world building is phenomenal, and I will probably spend a lot of time living in there because that is a phenomenally amazing game.
Good choice. Recommended.
Cool.
I'm very much enjoying. Yeah.
The last game I played was Thimbleweed Park, because I'm really into retro games and pixel art, and the person that made the artwork for Thimbleweed Park is I'm a big fan of his work. I also have some posters here. of him.
You're
So yeah, it's
very
really
into.
lovely.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's a lovely little game. So, and also very fun. So yeah, hopefully one day I hope to achieve his skill level of pixel drawing.
I believe in you, Mark. You can do it.
Thank you. Do you have any last tips for our audience before we close off?
There is probably something that I want to touch for people that are thinking about contributing to Godot. I feel like the approach that we have to the contribution might be a little scary sometimes because Godot, if you download Godot engine right now, you're going to download, I think, less than 40 megabytes of executable, and that's your game engine. Plus the export templates there on the side that are another 200, 300 megabytes for the different platforms. And so because the size of the engine is small, we absolutely don't want anything that is not necessary to come with the engine. So both for users, this is something to think about. Is like, do not expect everything out of the box. Godot has a lot of things out of the box, things that would be hard to build otherwise, or would be too clunky, or people like really want and expect. But in general, be ready to download plugins, and so that's from the side of the user. From the side of people that want to contribute, absolutely come contribute with Godot. It's a good place. I'm really happy. Of course, I wouldn't be there otherwise if I wasn't happy. But please do keep in mind that I see a lot of people being excited, contributing new features, and then getting rejected, which is, of course, it's not nice to be on that side of getting your contribution rejected. But Godot, we reject by default because we really don't want to bring too much into the engine. So if it can be done in a plugin, people are probably going to tell you like this is a cool idea, but please put it in a plugin and not in the engine. We also have a proposals repository, which is a place where we gather a little bit like what people want, what they would like to see in the engine. It is not a amount of thumbs up equals features that gets implemented, because of course there comes also technical difficulties such as who's going to maintain this. And with a small team of people, like of hired people, and we do have a bigger team of contributors, but still we need to, every time we implement a new feature, we need a fallback for it. Like if the contributor leaves, what do we do with this feature? Is there anybody else that can pick it up? So it is hard to find a balance between saying no to everything and yes to everything. And we do our best. So for people that want to contribute with bug fixes, absolutely do it. We need it. So that's highly appreciated. If you want to contribute to the documentation as well, that's really appreciated. And testing, triaging issues, those are all those kind of things that help a lot. Because the more time that the developer team can spend developing and fixing, the less time they spend testing other pieces of code. There's still more time and more bug fixes to get into the engine. But for features, please consider discussing, but before spending days implementing something.
Yes.
There we have a proposal repository for public discussion. We have a contributor chat. So do not if you want to do it, if you want to show your feature, you're really sure that it's going to get merged, go ahead, but it might not happen. So we do recommend people to check the proposals repository, also because there's a lot of discussion going on the proposal. So maybe the proposal starts in one way and it ends with a different solution to the problem. And one of the things is that we don't want to go to this A/B problem, like you come with a solution, but that doesn't necessarily 100% fix the problem. So we want to understand the problem. We want to understand how much of a real and proven use case that is. Very often, so people come and like, oh, this would be cool. And the question is like, okay, is anybody going to use it other than you?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it blocking your work completely? If the answer is no to those, it's more difficult. It's not a no, of course, because things are open for discussion, but it is more difficult if you come with like, oh, this would be so cool, and it feels bad when you see people so excited about things that they like, and they have to say, I'm sorry, but we cannot get this. We cannot put this into the engine. It's just too much. Like the one reason I think it's interesting why we keep the download size so small is that we see in different parts of the community, like Facebook, Discord, we do see people that do not have the huge bandwidth. They don't have the optic fiber. They don't even have ADSL. Am I pronouncing it right? Okay, so, and for them, downloading gigabytes of software is an issue. We had people in the, I remember in the Discord channels, because I am active on Discord. I'm part of the moderation team as well, so I get to see a bunch of different things that happened in the community. And I remember there was this group of students, and they were using their mobile data to download the engine, and they said, I kind of want to try Unity, but if I download Unity, then I'm going to finish all my data for the month, and this is difficult. And it's one of the things that we do care about is also keeping the engine size small. Not to mention that also we have HTML exports, so don't want to download a huge web page when you want to play on browser. So that's also that front end as well. Like for when you download apps on the App Store, you don't want to download 100 megabytes of stuff. I know that the other engines are doing really good as well with the download size. I think that the minimum size of a Unity application for Android, last time I tried it, which was long ago, was like 15 megabytes. So it's not like it's massive or anything. But yes, Godot comes like Godot is built with Godot. The editor is built with Godot.
Cool.
So it's like kind of this tiny package of awesome that you can download. So yes, this is something that I wanted to tell people that are looking today and might be looking into contributing to Godot. This is how we work. Don't be discouraged if people will meet your feature with, sorry, is this really useful? Is this something that you really need? Because as I said, it's really nice to see people excited about things, but there's all this huge chunk of work that comes with every new line of code, every new feature. You only need to make it work with the rest of the engine. So the more it grows, the more connections you have to figure out, the more you have to make sure that all the different pieces work together. Plus, we also need to make sure that things get maintained, because the last thing that we want is people developing a game and then next release we're like, yeah, sorry, there's not really anyone that's maintaining this core feature. So, this is not really great. So we don't want to get into that situation.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd love to riff on something you kind of mentioned there that I think is so important. And it sort of speaks to both the power and the what I enjoy so much about open source is a community, right? Like if you're working to a project, it's a community of people that has a history, it has a social structure, it has it has interconnected people who talk to, there's relationships there. And I think sometimes, I don't know if people forget or they just don't even know, if you think about it as if you're showing up to a party where you don't know anybody, are you going to show up and just be like, hey, everyone? And no one's going to know who you are or care, right? And that's just how social structures work. Whereas if you come to a party where you don't know anyone and you introduce yourself to some people and you get to know people and you hear about everyone's story and you get to know people, and that's how you get to spread your influence and spread the communication and that kind of stuff. So showing up to an open source project with that in mind and being like, okay, how do I start small? How do I get people to trust me? All right, building trust in a social situation is the same as building trust in an open source situation. Being following through when you say you're going to do things, actively, responding to people, being a helpful member of that community. Those are things that build trust. So if you want to have a deep and long impact in an open source project, or even just a short one necessarily, starting small, using the same social skills you would use in real life, they apply just the same here, because it's all about having a social contract. It's all about working together towards a common goal. So just keep that in mind and use that as sort of as a rule of thumb to help guide your experience. Because yeah, like 100%, Larry, like you said, like if you have this big idea for something, like just start with a design doc, right? Say like, hey, I have this idea. Is it a good idea? Manage expectations. Do all the same sort of stuff that you would do in an interpersonal relationship that you would do normally.
Yeah, manage expectation actually it is a really, really big one. And also this what you said about trust, I think it plays a very important role, because open source is pretty much about that. It's pretty much about building relationships with people, working together. And it is hard for people to accept your big feature if we don't know who you are. Like, are you going to stay? Are you going to live in a month? Like, this is really true, because I feel like there's a lot of mentality around, oh, but if my code is good, it should just be taken. But there's a lot more to open source than that. It is this social environment where you also need to build social relationship, gain trust of people. And that's really, really important as well. I think it's good that you mentioned that. So, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you both very much for your valuable contributions for today. We'll be back next week. The topic might be licensing. So it still depends if we can find the right lawyers and stuff. But if so, we'll talk about licenses. So thanks again. Please contribute today, and also see you at next week. Bye-bye.